And this message is that good health is possible in a natural way, without depending on pharmaceuticals. The second part of my lecture essentially can be summarised as describing the main threats to natural health. Because surprising though it might seem, the health therapies that I will be telling you about this evening are actually a great threat, especially at the European level. So I'll be describing these threats, summarising them, and also explaining where they come from. At that point we'll take a very short break, after which I'll continue by, in the same vein, describing how the European Union, from where these threats come, has origins that are rather different to the origins that we've been told about. And then the conclusion of my lecture this evening will relate to how you can work with us to bring about a positive change to all of this. So let's start at the very beginning, as a famous musical once said, and look at the idea that good health is possible without having to use pharmaceuticals and drugs. First, let me explain to you that the research I'll be telling you about was carried out at the Dr. Rath Research Institute. This is a non-profit organisation based in Santa Clara in California, in the United States. It was founded, as its name would suggest, by Dr. Rath, Dr. Matthias Rath, a German physician and researcher, and it specialises in conducting research into the prevention and treatment of diseases using micronutrients such as vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and so on. Or, in other words, all of the natural substances that we find in food. The Institute has a huge laboratory, 23,000 square feet, state-of-the-art, and it has the very latest scientific tools. And it's staffed with world-class scientists from a variety of relevant disciplines. The findings that I'll be telling you about in a few moments have been published also in numerous peer-reviewed scientific journals. Peer-reviewed means that before the articles, the studies are published, they are examined by other scientists to look for flaws and to ensure that there is a sound basis for the study, the article, before publication. And in all, the researchers at the Institute have now had over 80 studies published in peer-reviewed journals. And they relate to diseases such as heart disease, cancer, leukemia, and many others. And based on these breakthroughs that I'll be telling you about this evening, they believe that it is now possible for heart disease, cancer, and many other common diseases to become a thing of the past. Time tonight doesn't allow me to tell you about all of the breakthroughs that they've made in recent years, but I'm going to start by concentrating on three, because I think perhaps, as you'll see, three of them are more important than any of the others. The first one relates to their finding, the discovery of Dr. Rath's, that atherosclerosis, which is heart disease in layman's language, the narrowing of the arteries, classical heart disease, is actually an early form of the sailor's disease, scurvy. Scurvy is the classical, the clinical, in fact, vitamin C deficiency disease. And what they have found is that the main cause of the narrowing of the arteries is a deficiency of vitamin C, principally, and also of other nutrients. Between about 1600 and 1800, as this old painting shows, James Lind, a surgeon in the British Royal Navy, conducted clinical tests and published a paper in 1747. Because between 1600 and 1800, around 1 million sailors were killed from scurvy. At that time, it wasn't understood that the substance we now call vitamin C in fruits and vegetables was essential to man. Sailors would eat lots of biscuits and other foods that could be preserved for a long time. And consequently, many of them on long voyages developed scurvy. So James Lind was the first person to prove that taking lemons and limes on these voyages would prevent the seamen from developing scurvy. So this is breakthrough number one. I'll come back to this in a few moments and explain more about the concept and the understanding of this. Number two, next. In a similar way, micronutrient deficiencies of vitamins and minerals, are the primary underlying cause for most cardiovascular conditions today, including high blood pressure, heart failure, irregular heartbeat, diabetic circulatory problems, and many others. Third, and no less impressively, it turns out that the spread of all cancer cells in the body can be inhibited naturally. I understand, I can see that straight away, if you haven't come across these findings, these concepts before, that this may be surprising, if not even perhaps a little shocking even. So, in order to bring you to understand how I can stand here on the basis of these 80 or so scientific studies and say these things, let me first of all show you a few of the foundations, the basic concepts of what we call cellular medicine. The first, perhaps the most important concept behind cellular medicine is the idea that diseases, health problems, originate not at the level of organs, but at the level of the cells, the billions of cells that together make up our bodies. Currently, in our health systems, when we fall sick, our doctor sends us to a specialist at the hospital who deals specifically with the organ with which we have a problem. So if we have a heart problem, our doctor sends us to see a cardiologist. If we have a problem related to cancer, it'll be an oncologist. We have liver specialists and so on. Well, ultimately, it turns out that the problems that bring about these diseases, these illnesses, mostly originate from the same cause. And as we move on through the next few slides, just keep in mind that it's not our organs that are sick, but it's the cells that make them up, which is where the problem lies. Because to explain this, you can think of a cell, and this applies to all of the cells in the body. You can think of a cell as being like a small city. The nucleus of the cell, that's the purple blob in the bottom picture there, this can be compared to the city hall, because it contains all of the information, the cell's genetic material, that the cell needs in order to function correctly. The cell membrane, which is what separates the cells from the outside environment, can be compared to the city wall, and that it acts as a protection to the cell. Then we have the Golgi complex, which is this brownish blob at the bottom on the right in the picture there. This can be compared to the city factory, if you like, because what it does, it processes macromolecules, it produces proteins, lipids, and so on. And finally, we have the mitochondria, which can be compared to the power station. The mitochondria are the power plants of cells. Without them, the cell would not be able to supply itself with energy. So the message here, straight away, is that micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and so on, they are essential biological fuel for the cells. Without them, the cells could not function properly. And in the absence of sufficient amounts of vitamins and minerals, this is when health problems start to occur. Because a chronic deficiency, this is the key finding. If I had to summarise the researchers' findings in one sentence, it would be that a chronic deficiency of micronutrients is the most common cause of poor cellular function and the main cause of common diseases such as heart disease and cancer. Now let's take a little look at how some of these concepts work when dealing with some of the diseases that I've been talking about thus far. And we'll start with cardiovascular disease, because heart disease is the biggest killer in the industrialised world. And as I mentioned earlier, the key cause of heart disease, according to the research now being produced in the Institute, is a deficiency of vitamin C and other nutrients. Now, this is different, of course, from the message we get from our doctors, who tell us that high cholesterol is the main cause of heart disease. Well, in actual fact, what actually happens is the body only produces cholesterol when the arteries of the heart are subject to micro damage, when small cracks and lesions occur in the arteries of the heart. I'll explain more about this in a few moments, but bear in mind that the heart is a muscle. Okay? The heart is the hardest working muscle, in fact, in our bodies. And through the constant pumping action of the heart, a very large degree of pressure and stress is put upon the arteries as the heart pumping, in fact, 100,000 times a day, pumping blood puts a lot of pressure on the arteries. Our bodies are in a continual process of repair. Every single day, our bodies are breaking down cells and rebuilding cells. Our bodies are sometimes compared to machines, but it's actually more complex than that, because our bodies are capable of repairing themselves if we give them the right fuel to do so. So, when damage, micro cracks to the arteries occur, the body will use vitamin C to repair these. Vitamin C, as it turns out, is a key component in something we call collagen. Collagen is one of the main proteins in the body, and vitamin C is a key component of this. Collagen can repair the damage to arteries, but if the body hasn't got the nutrients, the vitamins, the minerals it needs to do this, it will produce cholesterol instead. Cholesterol works to a point, but, and this is the important point, if the damage continues, if the underlying cause of the problem is not corrected, in other words, if the body isn't resupplied with vitamins and things that it needs, the body will continue to produce cholesterol. In effect, the cholesterol acts as a plaster cast to try to reinforce these arteries. And at first, this is okay, but in time, as the arteries become further and further narrowed, this is where we run into problems like heart attacks, or in the brain, strokes. I talked about this aspect a few moments ago, because your heart is, as I said, the hardest working muscle in the body. It works when we sleep, it works even harder when we're awake. And this concept, the concept that I'm describing to you now, explains something rather interesting, because why do we get heart attacks, but not nose attacks, or ear attacks? We get heart attacks and not ear or nose attacks, because the stress to the blood supply to the ears and the nose is not as great as the stress of the heart putting on the arteries. If you were to, as this picture on the right demonstrates, put your foot onto your garden hose and pump up and down on it 100,000 times a day for several weeks, it would soon develop cracks. And this is exactly what happens to the arteries if they are not supplied with sufficient amounts of vitamin C to produce collagen. Another interesting fact here is that most animals don't get heart attacks. In fact, most animals produce their own vitamin C in their bodies, and they produce this from glucose. Man and the other apes and guinea pigs and one or two other animals are unable to produce vitamin C. For any of you who have any medical knowledge, the production of vitamin C involves 4 enzymes in the body, and man and women lack the 4th enzyme in this string. So most animals avoid the heart disease scenario because they are able to produce sufficient amounts of vitamin C to maintain the structural integrity, if you like, of the arteries. And most interestingly, the amount of vitamin C that animals produce is dramatically higher than the amounts that we are able to obtain, even in a good diet. The EU recommended daily amount for vitamin C is 60 milligrams. Now, animals that produce their own vitamin C, if you compare their weight to the size of the average person, they produce between 1,000 milligrams and 20,000 milligrams every day, and even more when they get sick. I included this picture of the bear here for a single reason, that the average cholesterol levels in bears are very, very high. If you presented yourself to a doctor with cholesterol levels as high as bears, that your doctor would insist that you start taking drugs to control it straight away. So what this tells us, of course, because we know, as I said to you, that bears produce their own vitamin C. If cholesterol is really the cause of heart disease, bears would have become extinct by now. And the only reason they haven't become extinct is because they produce sufficient amounts, under normal circumstances, of vitamin C in their bodies to avoid narrowed arteries, to avoid the cholesterol being used to patch up damage to the arteries. So, to sum up this little section, an optimum supply of micronutrients, including vitamin C, can replace the lacking vitamins in the arterial wall, and in doing so, this helps to prevent and repair cracks and lesions, damage to the walls of the arteries, and in doing so, helps to prevent heart attack and stroke. This man here is Dr. Albert Spendiorgi, and he won a Nobel Prize in 1937 for the discovery of vitamin C and its role in diseases, in the prevention of diseases. And what's really interesting, in 1970, he wrote a letter to another Nobel Prize winner, a man called Linus Pauling, who in fact Dr. Arth and Dr. Nitzviki from our research institutes both worked with about 25 years ago. But in this letter, here's what he said. He said, right from the beginning, I felt that the medical profession misled the public. If you don't get ascorbic acid, that's vitamin C, with your food, you get scurvy, he said. So the medical profession said that if you don't get scurvy, you're all right. I think that this is a very grave error, he said. But he went on. He said, scurvy is not the first sign of the deficiency, but a pre-mortal syndrome. And for full health, you need much more, very much more. I am taking myself, he said, about 1,000 milligrams a day. But this does not mean that this is really the optimum dose, because we do not know what full health really means and how much ascorbic acid you need for it. What I can tell you, he finished, is that one can take any amounts of ascorbic acid without without the least danger. Interesting, isn't it? This is a very different message to the message that we get from our medical authorities, our doctors, and our governments, let's face it. Now, this man discovered vitamin C, and he won a Nobel Prize for it. So I think it would be sensible if we were at least to give him the benefit of the doubt and assume that he knew what he was talking about. Assume that if the Nobel Prize was wisely awarded, that he has some authority in making these statements. Let's now take a quick look at another heart problem, heart failure. Heart failure occurs and is a devastating problem because it incapacitates people. People do not have the energy to get up and walk around, to work and live their lives. Well, the problem here, once you understand the cellular origins of disease that I was talking about earlier, the problem is not a mechanical problem, it's a cellular problem. Because an optimum supply of micronutrients provides the fuel that the cells need to contract in order to cause the heart to beat. The abnormal flabby contractions that occur in heart failure that result in the heart filling with blood and being unable to pump properly can be corrected through sufficient providing of the correct micronutrients. And in doing so, the pumping action of the heart can be corrected. This is what the studies that Dr. Rath and his researchers have found, have shown. The really exciting part about this is that this approach, the cellular medicine approach, could eventually result in heart transplants becoming a thing of the past. Because if you think about it, once you understand that the origins of the problem lie at the cellular level through an insufficient supply of bioenergy, vitamins and things, a heart transplant is a mechanical solution, a mechanical exchange, if you like. The correct solution, according to the research that our researchers are now coming out with, is to replenish the heart with the fuel that it needs to perform its job correctly. The researchers have a joke, and it's essentially this. This is something they talk about quite often. Heart transplants are like your car running out of petrol. And you go to the garage attendant and say, "Fill up the tank, please." And he says, "No, no, sir, no. What you need is a new motor." This is the wrong direction that we've taken with this problem. Heart transplants are an amazing feat. Let's not take it away from that. It's very clever. But once you understand the source of the problem, another very exciting and safer and simpler option starts to open up. Next, let's take a little look at cellular medicine and the control of cancer. Because of all the diseases that the industrialized world is now facing, the diagnosis of cancer is perhaps the one that's most fearful to most people. Well, there's good news here, because in the future, our researchers believe that the diagnosis of cancer will no longer mean a death sentence or even a fear of death for patients. To understand this, you need to understand how cancer cells destroy the tissue of the body. All cancer cells produce what we call biological cutting tools. Technically, these are enzymes that digest collagen. You remember earlier I talked about collagen being one of the most important proteins in the body. And that collagen acts as the connective tissue, the glue that holds our organs together. Well, in order for cancer to spread, in order for a cancer cell to move from the tumour and spread to different regions of the body, what it has to do is to cut through the surrounding tissue. Now, all cancer cells, as I say, produce these enzymes which digest collagen. They literally eat their way through the connective tissue surrounding it. Important point here being that the more of these enzymes produced by a given type of cancer, the more malignant, the more dangerous the cancer will be, and probably the shorter the patient's life expectancy. So a little diagram here is to explain this concept. At the top we have the cancer cell digesting its way through collagen to reach the bloodstream. Once the cancer cell reaches the bloodstream, of course, it can travel to anywhere else more distant in the body. And at the other end of its journey, if you like, it produces these same collagen digesting enzymes to exit the bloodstream and locate itself in another part of the body. This is the main mechanism that cancer cells use to spread. But it turns out that vitamin C, the natural amino acid lysine, and some polyphenols found in green tea are capable of blocking cancer cells' collagen-destroying enzymes naturally. Vitamin C and lysine are both components of collagen. The body cannot produce collagen, in fact, without them. So, blocking cancer cells from spreading involves having a sufficient amount of these nutrients present for the body to be able to defend itself against cancer. The Institute has now published more than 50 studies in peer-reviewed journals documenting that a specific combination of micronutrients is effective in preventing the development and growth of all human cancer cells available. I've got a graph on the next slide here which gives some examples of this. On the vertical axis here to the left, this represents the degree to which the cancer cells are being inhibited from invading surrounding tissue. On the bottom, the horizontal axis, you see the degree to which the micronutrient concentration, that's the amounts of vitamin C and other nutrients, these are the amounts being used. And the message is, the higher the concentration of the correct micronutrients, the greater the degree to which the cancer cells are inhibited from spreading. I'll just mention something else here as well, because it's not a matter of simply randomly choosing nutrients. Vitamins are rather like a football team, in that you have to have the correct members of the team present in the correct positions in order to have a successful outcome. You wouldn't have a football team with 11 goalkeepers or 11 strikers. And equally, you need to have the correct members of the micronutrient team present in the right amounts in order for the correct outcome to take place. Dr. Arth and the researchers began spreading this information 9 years ago. In 2002, following their presenting these findings at the conference in Miami, in Florida, they published details of their findings in USA Today, which is the largest circulating newspaper in the United States. And they did this for a simple reason, that they did not have faith in the medical world, and particularly the pharmaceutical world, which I'll come to later this evening. They did not have faith that these findings would be acted upon and shared either quickly enough or perhaps even at all. For 3 years, nothing happened, and it took until September 2005 for the world's largest Research Institute, which is the National Institute of Health near Washington, in the United States, to publish a study confirming that, yes, vitamin C selectively kills cancer cells. I use the word selectively for a reason, because this is the difference, ladies and gentlemen, between the natural therapy approach to cancer and the chemotherapy approach to cancer. Chemotherapy cannot distinguish between a cancer cell and a normal cell, a diseased cell and a healthy cell. But vitamin C can. Vitamin C does not destroy healthy cells. In fact, it helps them. It's essential. It's an essential nutrient for life. But to cancer cells, in sufficient amounts, vitamin C is toxic. Vitamin C selectively kills cancer cells. So what our researchers say is that now that the National Institute of Health have confirmed these findings, no doctor, journalist or politician can ever say that they did not know. This information is out there, ladies and gentlemen. It's not being put on the front page of your newspapers. It's not the first news story on the television, but it's there. It's out there. And it should be shared. 2 years ago, in 2009, researchers at the Mayo Clinic in the United States published a study in which they found that green tea polyphenols were effective in treating leukemia. Most of the patients in this study saw a 50% or greater decline in lymph node size. Swollen lymph nodes are a feature of leukemia. But look at that statistic. 50%, that's half or more of the patients saw, in fact, no, sorry, most of the patients saw a 50% or greater. Now, if a drug had those properties, it would be on the front page of your newspaper, it would be the main news in the evening on your television. This was simply green tea polyphenols by themselves. They didn't add other useful nutrients that our researchers are using, vitamin C, lysine, and so on. But this adds further confirmation to the independent research being conducted by Dr. Raab and his researchers. As a result, since 2009, we're aware of at least 6, 7 centres around the United States that have been and are conducting studies using green tea, polyphenols, and other micronutrients in the control of cancer. And our researchers are absolutely convinced that the results of these studies will eventually change medicine forever. It's simply a matter of time. But we have to stop here for a moment and ask ourselves, why is it that we haven't heard about these breakthroughs before? Why haven't you seen these breakthroughs on your evening news, in magazines or in newspapers? As I said before, if any drug had had successes like this, we would see headlines saying cancer cured, or the end for cancer is in sight. So why is it? Well, there are several reasons for this, and this brings me to the second part of my lecture this evening, which relates to the key threats to natural health. The reasons why there are people, organisations, industrial cartels, and even governments who don't want you, it would seem, to know about this. The first one, the first threat, is something called the Food Supplements Directive. And this is a European Union law that was passed in 2002. And its main aim is to set restrictions on the types and the amounts, the doses of vitamins and minerals that can be contained in supplements. And to disguise this threat, the EU, or as we call it, the Brussels EU, is pretending that the maximum permitted levels for each nutrient will be calculated scientifically by a process it calls scientific risk assessment. I haven't got time to go into the specific approaches they'll be using, but let me just summarise and tell you that most of the currently proposed methods that they've put forward for assessing the supposed risk of consuming vitamin C and other nutrients are anything but scientific and are actually deeply flawed. As I move on, you'll start to understand that there's a pattern emerging here, and that these deep flaws in these scientific analyses are no mistakes. We believe that this is deeply intended on their behalf. The second threat is to something called the Traditional Health Medicinal Products Directive. This is again a European Union law that was passed in 2004. And what this does is to subject natural herbal medicines, things that have been around for thousands and thousands of years, to subject them to a prohibitively expensive registration procedure, whereby all herbs that are not granted a license are banned.